That's why Nero's feels so close to me. It was just decimated. It felt like filming in Auschwitz when I filmed in the houses that were burned.
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. Yoni, thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for coming.
Of course. I want to start by having you introduce yourself. Who are you and where you come from and what brought you to Israel?
So I'm Yoni Collins. I'm an Israeli-Canadian filmmaker and videographer. I was born in Jerusalem and grew up in Toronto. Moved when I was really young. When I was 18, I came back to Israel. I was a volunteer for Magen David Adom. Worked for a little bit and served in the army as a lone soldier for a year and a half. Then I went back to Canada, did film school there, was flying back and forth between Canada and Israel for about 7 years, working in both. And after October 7th, I moved back to Israel end of November to help document the war.
Were you asked to do that, or did you feel an internal pull?
Definitely an internal pull. In the army, I was injured during training. I had a bad injury. And because of that, I didn't have reserve duty and figured after the 7th, I wanted to serve. All of my friends were being called back to go fight or serve in some way. And my way of serving, I felt that I could do best was with the camera and to document it all.
So let's go back to pre-October. What kind of work were you doing at that point?
Pre-October 7th, I was doing documentary work, commercial work, music videos, mostly in Canada, some in Israel. I had done a documentary about an Afghanistan war veteran in Canada who used music to heal from PTSD and raise awareness of veteran suicide and mental health. So I was working with veterans a lot from that. I was working on documentaries about the Holocaust, and I've had experience filming in those kind of places in Poland, in the camps with survivors. And then I'd been working on a few documentary projects that I was developing related to Israel. And then the 7th happened, so I canceled them indefinitely or postponed them indefinitely and just said, I got to do this instead.
Was the documentary about the veteran and bringing awareness to veteran suicide something that was adjacent to Israel, or was this a separate project and separate interest of yours?
Completely separate. There's always overlap. I've served in the army, so I know a lot of people with PTSD, and I suffer also from PTSD. So it's very close to me. And that veteran I had heard about on the news in 2021, I think, on Remembrance Day, right after the Taliban took over Afghanistan. So the Afghanistan war stories were on the news a lot. I remember reaching out to him. We shot it for 4 days. I flew to Prince Edward Island, which is East Canada. And he served there with the Canadian Armed Forces and was there from 2007.
Seems a little bizarre that you were doing work in the space of mental health veterans and Holocaust documenting, because I feel like all of those things are feeling very either present or resonant right now.
100%. I've always felt connected to all of those topics for personal reasons. And October 7th kind of connected them all. And that's why I felt that I was able to do it. I didn't come immediately after the 7th because I wanted to balance out my own mental health and PTSD from everything that went on. And yeah, that's what I've been doing ever since.
Something that I'm experiencing where if somebody in a Jewish context referenced survivor on October 6th, I would think, oh, a Holocaust survivor. Now, when someone in a Jewish context references a survivor, I think about October 7th. Has that been a shift for you also?
A little bit. It's interesting. I actually don't like the word survivor for either. I still use Holocaust survivor and sometimes October 7th survivor, but I don't like when people define people as survivors, especially a lot of my friends who did survive. Calling someone a survivor is giving them a label and a definition. It becomes who they are. It becomes a personality, as opposed to saying someone who survived is an action that they did, and it's in the past, and it gives the agency back to them and helps them get over it by making it in past tense. So I usually say a person who survived Nova or a person who survived October 7th rather than an October 7th survivor.
Have you found with your friends, and you have quite a few personal connections that we'll get into, have you found that your friends appreciate that distinction?
Most of them, yeah.
Let's talk for a minute about your own mental health journey here and how you prepared yourself to come back.
I have done therapy before for PTSD and for trauma, so I'm more emotionally equipped to deal with it than a lot of people. That being said, it still does have an effect. I regularly do therapy still while I've been doing this every week almost. It got very hard after March when I was filming in Ottawa with the delegation of Canadian families of victims in the parliament. A bunch of us, and that was when I saw a bunch of the photos of Zaka that were classified, taken by Zaka volunteers through one of my friends. That was the worst stuff I've seen, I think, out of going to all the kibbutzim and seeing all the videos on Telegram and everything. The photos from Zaka were the worst. So after that, I took a bit of a mental health break and needed to recuperate. And then after I was filming in the north in July, I also took a bit of a mental health break after we had 6 rocket attacks while I was filming there.
Well, that's pretty relevant to this morning. We're in Tel Aviv, September 25th. We had rocket sirens this morning, and the north is really where the action is right now. Would you feel compelled to go to the north at some point in the near future?
At some point, yes. Not as far north as the border cities, but the Golan Heights, definitely. I have friends who still live up there, and I want to take care of them and see how they're doing as well.
Do you feel like being here is a bit of exposure therapy for you? You're confronting something as much as you're advocating and doing your own work?
Probably. Not 100%, but I think so.
Does anything feel healing to you about being here right now?
Definitely. I think being in Tel Aviv, especially, and coming from Toronto, where there's a lot of antisemitism, being around my people, my culture, it's very, very nice in a world full of hate to be in a place full of love.
You mentioned that you had been in therapy in Canada. We've seen in the therapeutic community a huge resurgence of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Were you concerned that, I don't know, your therapist or other people in your life who aren't Jewish or were against you in some way after the war started?
I was never concerned about my therapist. My friends, yes. There were a lot of friends that I haven't spoken to since everything happened, or a few that I've spoken to only a little bit, which is very, very tough. They really were my best friends, and I want to talk to them more, but it's hard to maintain A, at a distance, and B, just from everything going on.
You mean across political divide or?
We're all busy with different things in film and music and war. So the political divide is definitely a major one. Some of them know it's complex, others don't. The media in Canada is very, very biased. And yeah, it's very, very tough.
Do you feel at home when you go back to Toronto?
Toronto is interesting. I don't know. I miss when it felt like home. And sometimes I walk around and it's okay. And then I see a riot or a swastika or something going on, and that's just the worst feeling. I was there for the Toronto Film Festival, and protesters came into the premiere of the only Israeli film that I was at, and I definitely have just noticed a major shift in the last few years.
Oh, so the shift predates October 7th.
The shift for me was the May 2021 war that started slowly, and then October 7th, it just exploded. And I think there's no going back from that turning point.
Let's talk for a minute about your personal connection to the war or the attack. What do you feel comfortable sharing about the people in your life who've been through this?
I've got now, from doing everything, a lot of friends who have families who are hostages or family members who were killed. Several from Nova, which I think are the hardest ones. My friend Iris is from Kibbutz Nir Oz. I'm very, very close with her. And both of her parents, Judy Weinstein, Chagi and Gadi Chagi, were murdered brutally outside of the kibbutz on October the 7th in the morning. Hamas kidnapped their bodies and took them hostage, and they're still there. And we're doing a lot of advocacy for them. Judy is the only Canadian hostage. Both of them are American citizens and Israelis, and Judy is Canadian as well. So that's the toughest one. That's why Nir Oz feels so close to me. It's the kibbutz I've been to the most times. It is the kibbutz where 1 in 4 people were killed or kidnapped. And it was just decimated. It felt like filming in Auschwitz when I filmed in the houses that were burned.
Did you know any of these people before the war started?
On October 7th, when I woke up in Toronto, I had a lot of missed calls from mostly my best friend and then others from other people in my life. My best friend told me there was a war, and that's how I discovered it. And then I called everyone I knew to find out if everyone was okay. My friend's cousin's girlfriend and really good friend were missing from Nova. We found out later they were killed. One of my friends from Birthright, his aunt and uncle had been missing in Kfar Aza. They, thank God, survived. Someone from my shul, his cousin was missing in Kibbutz Cholitz. We then found out she was killed, and I'm very close with her mother. It just was endless. My friend's cousin was killed fighting in Be'eri. So it was just a lot of connections, and it never really ended. And now it's a lot more.
So you couldn't look away. I mean, your phone was already
Yeah.
pulling you in.
I saw all of Telegram, everything that was out there I watched, and it was not easy.
Why did you do that? Why did you watch all of it?
I was shocked by what was going on in Israel. I never imagined anything like that could happen. I did expect there to be a war at some point. We thought there would be a war with Hezbollah first in the north before the 7th and the Hamas attack. So it was just shocking that it was that level of brutality.
And it was important for you to feel connected to it, to really see it.
Yeah. Also, I think part of me was looking for my friends' families in the videos.
To me, it feels like kind of a uniquely Jewish emphasis on identifying bodies of hostages still as hostages if they haven't been brought back for proper burial. Is there anything that you want to say about that, since there are 2 people close to you whose bodies are hostage and who we identify still as active hostages?
Yeah, there's a few more than 2. Well, Zaka is the organization that went in to recover bodies and body parts and human remains for burial. There's a big emphasis on Jewish burial and respecting the body. They have a lot of emphasis on respecting bodies, and Hamas does not respect bodies. They are holding a lot still. There's 101 hostages still, and I think at least 30 bodies. I can't remember the exact number now, ever since we got 6 more out. We want them back. They deserve to be buried. The families deserve closure. The living ones, I feel, are more imperative to get out. The bodies deserve to be out as well. They were kidnapped and brutally murdered, some killed in Israel and taken, some murdered in Gaza and still remain there. And they're being used as human currency, which is disgusting.
The beginning of the war keeps slapping us across the face. I don't think it was that long ago that they released the phone call that Judy Weinstein, she's asking for help. Her husband has already died. October 7th keeps knocking on our door. What is that like for you personally, and what is it like for your work?
Feels endless. There were 1,200 plus people murdered that day and 250 plus hostages. And no matter how much you document, there's always more to document. I've been to 10 of the places that were affected, but at least 22 were affected. There's always more families, that's always evolving. And I just help as many people as I can.
So you feel like your work is part of the war effort?
100%. I feel it's for not only documenting for history and for justice, but also for the healing of victims. Because when they talk about it, it's very healing for them. When they talk about it to a journalist or the news, not necessarily, then it's more factual and more work. But I come in not as a journalist, not as news. not even as a filmmaker, just as a friend. And I tell them I'm documenting this for history. If you want it published, fine. If you don't want it published, fine. It's for you and your family. And I think it's very healing for them. And I stay in touch with most of the people that I film.
What kind of work have you released? What kind of work can people see that you've done since the war started?
On my Instagram page, I post some Hasbara stuff that I've been working on with other people, other filmmakers and influencers.
Can you explain what Hasbara is for people who don't
Yeah,
know?
it's essentially explaining things about the war and stories of Nova or hostage awareness, raising awareness for getting our hostages out. So I've been doing a lot of that. And I put together a 1-hour documentary called Lenses of Lions that I showed in Toronto and in Tel Aviv, just as an overview of the work I've been doing so people can hear the stories and witness it and understand deeper. I've filmed that one in the kibbutzim, in Kfar Aza, Be'eri, Nir Oz, Netiv Asara, Nirim, Sderot, Ofakim, the site of the Nova Festival, Kibbutz Cholit, and Kibbutz Kerem Shalom, and on the Israel-Egypt border and the northern border in Kiryat Shmona, all over the place. I filmed it in The Hague in February, in Ottawa with the Canadian families, in Poland on March of the Living with other survivors who survived both the Holocausts and October 7th, and just documenting as much as I can everywhere. And I wanted that to be an overview of what I've been doing. And I'm working on a few other projects, specific ones about friends of mine who were affected. Most of my work has been documenting just for history.
I didn't know there were any people who survived the Holocaust and October 7th.
There are people. There's a Holocaust survivor who's still in Gaza in captivity, but there were 6 that were at the March of the Living. They survived the Holocaust, and then they were in the kibbutzim when they were attacked.
Is there any theme that you hear from all of them?
It hurts them. They survived the Nazis. They thought they had triumphed over antisemitism when they built the South and moved back to their homeland and refounded the state. And then something like this happens and their grandkids are now labeled as survivors. It's traumatic. It's very traumatic for them.
What else can you tell us about the March of the Living work that you did?
March of the Living is a annual march every year from Auschwitz to Birkenau. They are 2 separate camps. One is a concentration camp, one is a death camp, 3 kilometers from each other. And Jews and allies from around the world march on Holocaust Memorial Day to commemorate the victims. And it's the same march that many of the victims of the Holocaust went through. This Memorial Day was overshadowed by the fact that October 7th had happened. I filmed Eylon Levy there, a former spokesperson.
For Israel.
Yeah, for Israel.
He still does a lot of work.
Yeah, he's still doing amazing work. And when I filmed him, he said, it's crazy that after people were captive in concentration camps less than 80 years later, their grandkids are captive in Gaza now. We obviously saw a lot of overlap between the way that people were murdered in the Holocaust and the way that people were murdered in the October 7th massacre. Even Hirsch Goldberg Polian with a gun to the back of his head. That was in Gaza recently. And burned bodies and people burning alive, children burning alive. I've been in all those houses. My friends are friends with the people who were burned alive. And yeah, it's not easy. There's a lot of overlap.
What do you think was the hardest thing about seeing the Zaka photos as opposed to all the other media that you've consumed about this?
The Zaka photos were very, very fresh, and they showed me the extent of the brutality and how they actually killed people, specifically at Nova and Kibbutz Be'eri and Highway 232. Those are the photos that I saw. And there was severe torture, severe burning, severe sexual violence. I've seen all those images, and on the one hand, I think the world should see them. On the other hand, I understand why some of the families would not want that. Some of the families have not seen them and don't want to because they don't want to see their loved ones like that. And I definitely understand that too. So it's a very tough situation, but specifically the genital mutilation and the sexual violence and the burned bodies were the hardest I've seen. Not all of them were burned entirely. Some were just burned in their genitals while they were alive.
People have a narrative that supports the notion that this was resistance, this was an attack meant to start an important war for Palestinian liberation. I think they have that view. They can sort of digest the violence in that way. It doesn't seem that anyone wants to acknowledge the sexual violence. Why do you think that people can tolerate other kinds of violence when they think about this and not the sexual violence? People who are critics of Israel.
I think if you ignore the sexual violence, then you can say it was just an attack. It was a terror attack like any other, which it wasn't. A lot of people were comparing it to 9/11. I would not compare it to 9/11. This was a ground invasion, mass ground invasion by a military force of a sovereign nation that ended up occupying that nation's territory and had lists and individual targeted killings and orders for hostage taking. It's more than any terror attack in history. It was a start of a war. It was a ground invasion of a country. I think they did it to fully conquer and humiliate. It was not just about murdering Jews, it was about humiliating defeat. And it's horrible. And there's still women in captivity who are going through sexual violence, which is the worst. My friend's cousin, Gumberger, is still a hostage. She's been hostage for almost a year. We don't know her status, but we know she was taken alive with her friends from the Nachalos base. And everything that happened on October 7th, the brutality that we saw Hamas do in a day, she's been with them for almost a year. And there's female hostages who have been with them for almost a year, and child hostages. And that is, I think, the most disturbing thing to think about what's happening to them in the tunnels after seeing everything that went down in the kibbutzim and at Nova.
I think that the work you're doing is meant to restore dignity. I mean, yes, to document for history, but also there's sort of this restoration of dignity when people can talk about it and appear as they want to appear and control the narrative, right? Not that it's not accurate, but to say it in their way. There has been a level of tourism that has cropped up around this. The phrase most commonly used is to bear witness. People want to come to bear witness. Obviously, that's also true of sites relevant to the Holocaust. What is your opinion about this?
I understand both sides of the argument. With the Holocaust, the concentration camps were preserved, and people can go there anytime for history. The kibbutzim will not always look like this. Most of them are going to be torn down and rebuilt. A lot of them have started tearing down and rebuilding. So to actually witness what Hamas did, you have a very small time frame to do that. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why people were coming in immediately. I think the issue is that it's still people's homes. People still live there. They're displaced from there. They can't live there now. A lot of their houses are completely destroyed or burned. But it's still people's private homes and people's residence. And it's an invasion of privacy. On the one hand, I understand why people from outside of Israel and even Israelis want to see it because they need to see for themselves what happened. And I get that that is important. But I think more for people outside of Israel flying on these missions to come bear witness, they have some level of wanting to feel a deeper connection to what happened because they're abroad and it happened when they were abroad and they really want to feel it, I think. So I understand both sides. I understand why some people want them to come in and some people don't. And I think both arguments are valid and important.
So we were put in touch by Yocheved, who runs the Sword of Iron Facebook group. It's huge, coordinates a lot of volunteer efforts. She shared a story about being at Nir Oz with a family, and she felt that the children were kind of disrespectful in front of one of the homes. Is there any guidance that you would offer people who have the opportunity, take the opportunity to come and see these places for how to do it right?
Extreme sensitivity and extreme empathy. You are not there as a guest. It's not your right to be there. You're being brought in usually by people who survived and by people who live there. There are still houses where some of them are hostages. and some are alive and they keep coming in and out. People who are displaced keep coming in and out of the kibbutzim, and you're a guest. Treat it like you would want to treat a guest. You have to be very, very respectful.
I was at Nova a couple months ago, and I was ambivalent about taking pictures or videos. In the end, I did. Do you have a thought about that? I mean, I'm not a photographer. I'm not a videographer. Do you think it's appropriate for people to be using their cameras in that context?
I think it depends what for. There's two types of people I've seen. A lot of them just want to document what happened, take pictures so they can show the world what happened. It's always important to now especially make sure that you're allowed to, because some of the families don't want pictures of their private homes taken. But if you're doing it just to show people that you went and did this thing, then no, it should be for a reason.
What's been the best thing about being back here, and what's been the hardest?
Best thing about being back here is being able to help my friends and people who survived and families of hostages on the ground. I can't do that fully from Canada, which is why I moved back. So it's been amazing to be able to actually be here and support the ground efforts. The hardest thing, I think, there's an impending war. So there's a lot of anxiety over when and how that's going to happen or what it's going to look like. And we just don't know what the future is going to hold. So that's definitely a tough part.
Actually, that was going to be my next question, is whether or not you feel safe.
Depends on the day and depends on the area. In the north, I definitely did not feel safe. In the south, I feel safer than I did at the very beginning. In Tel Aviv, we had the rocket this morning. It's just a matter of time before there's more. I was not freaked out this morning because I've been expecting it for months. Like, it's just been a matter of when. So I woke up to the siren and I was like, all right, it's time. Which is a sad reality that that's the way we think about it. But that's where I'm at.
I want to ask whether it's hard for you to not be in Miluim, actually a soldier at this time.
At the very, very beginning, it was. When all my friends were called back, I actually called Magen David Adom, the ambulance service, on October 8th to recertify me so I could volunteer on ambulances, and they said it was too crazy right now. So at the beginning, I really wanted to be. And then once I saw what impact I could actually have just filming and helping people in the best way that I possibly could, that guilt sort of alleviated a bit. And I was able to continue the work I was doing, and I'm happy to continue doing that.
Do you see any endpoint for this? Do you imagine, in a year, maybe I'll be somewhere else? Or how do you think about the future right now?
It's hard to think about the future. Honestly, it's day to day. I don't know what the future is going to look like. I don't know what the region is going to look like. I don't know what anything's going to look like. The whole thing can change. I've been just doing what I'm doing, hoping for the best, planning for the worst, and going on with it.
I want to thank you for having this conversation with me. I learned some things, some kind of disturbing things, but it's important that I know. And I hope that everyone who's listening has a chance to follow what you're doing.
Thank you.
כאן יש שמיים זוהרים והים תמיד כחול, יש פסנתר בשביל צלילים ומקום בשביל לגדול. כאן השדות תמיד פורחים כשתרוצי יחפה, ושטיחים צבעונים כשתבואי עייפה. כאן את יכולה לנוח, לא צריכה סיבה, כאן את יכולה להיות שמחה או עצובה. כאן אפשר לנוח, לחלום כל מה שבא ולרקוד כמו הרוח. מקום בלי דאגה, מקום בלי דאגה, מקום גדולים פתוחים, שתוכלי עכשיו לנשום ולחשוב לאט לאט, מותר לך שוב לחלום. יש מלבנים קטנים של אור להאיר את הדמיון, וקולות של אהבה פשוטה עולים מהסלון. כאן את יכולה לנוח, לא צריכה סיבה, כאן את יכולה להיות שמחה או עצובה. כאן אפשר לנוח, לחלום כל מה שבא ולרקוד כמו הרוח. מקום בלי דאגה, מקום בלי דאגה, מקום בלי דאגה. כאן את יכולה לנוח, לא צריכה סיבה, כאן את יכולה להיות שמחה או עצובה. כאן אפשר לנוח, לחלום כל מה שבא ולרקוד כמו הרוח. מקום בלי דאגה, מקום בלי דאגה, מקום בלי דאגה. כי כאן שמיים זוהרים והים תמיד כחול, יש פסנתר בשביל צלילים ומקום בשביל לגדול, בשביל לגדול.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.